yeah, well, I forgot to tell a story, an anecdote last week or last episode. I don't know if you feel like editing it in or whatever, we could do that, but I'll just tell it. So Doc and I were at Joe versus Kobashi at the New Yorker Hotel, and I remember at the end of the show, we're standing outside, and a wrestler named Matt Sydal was there, and I think that was
Okay, go on.
I think that was actually the first time we ever saw Matt Sydal.
Yeah.
And he was very impressive. Yeah, we go outside the New Yorker, and there's Matt Sydal. And I think we offered him weed. And I think he was down to smoke with us, but we couldn't quite work out the logistics at that point. That was before you could just, like, smoke anywhere in New York City like you can now.
We also, like, you know, we were the cool kids and all, but we weren't cool enough to go to an event and then find the people who performed that event and get them to come to our place yet. That wasn't, you know.
Our parents' places.
Right, your parents' place. Come meet the Abelsons. I mean, I love the Abelsons, but, you know.
So anyway, I remember you, Doc. You were not a wrestler yet. We were just fans. And you said to Matt Sydal, man, that show really made me want to become a wrestler. And Matt Sydal was like, that made you want to become a wrestler? That brutal chop fest where their chests are bleeding by the end of it? And you were like, yeah.
Yeah, right. That's good. Well, I mean, like a good brutal chop fest, I do think that it can get a little excessive, but Joe and Kobashi are masters of their form, you know.
I also wanted to point out, I don't think we talked about it too much, just how important that match was for the development of wrestling going forward, because it was this meeting of Puroresu and the American indie scene that was influenced by Puroresu, and that relationship came to define a lot of how wrestling developed in the next 10 to 15 years, because the relationship between Ring of Honor and Pro Wrestling Noah, the Japanese promotion at the time, blossomed out of that, and then eventually the relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling, which led to New Japan starting to make inroads into the American market themselves, and really the state of wrestling today has a lot to do with that.
And then eventually stuff like the Bullet Club, which was the American style, finally really piercing Japan.
Right. Yeah, the American guys like AJ Styles and then Kenny Omega Kenny Omega is Canadian, becoming top guys in Japan, which is very rare for gaijin, for foreigners to accomplish. All right.
We getting some levels down?
Yeah, let's
level
get
1, level
this.
2.
Ho, balls, check.
Check your balls.
Check.
Check my balls.
Yeah.
All right.
Check them.
Check them. 1, 2,
2,
3.
3.
What?
3 balls.
It's just assist. That's a shoot, brother.
Mine's an actual third one. Moves around.
That's how you can grow that beard, man. It's just all the testosterone. I gotta say, I got a pretty good beard, but yours is like just magnificent.
We are all bearded men, but Evan is
the beardedest,
superlatively bearded.
You know, my father has in the past competed in beard competitions, and I went with him to one. I have to, because mine, I just was unemployed for a while, and it grew out. I didn't even know it grew in like this. And I went and watching a lot of guys be really proud of their beard and because if you go to a beard competition, it's a combination of sort of a cosplay kind of vibe and like everything that is wrong with society's conception of masculinity. And a big thing is like, okay,
sounds
sure,
like wrestling.
Sure, you can take care of it. Sure, you can do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, like, it's kind of just a thing your body does, right? Like, you have so little control over whether or not it grows in really nice.
People ask me, how did you grow your hair that long? Like, I just didn't fucking cut it.
Yeah, like, it's not that hard. If you can't do it, I mean, that sucks, but it's not like an inherent personal problem of yours.
No, my personal problem might be that I'm unwilling to groom myself.
Yeah, well.
Like, it's the opposite of...
It's a lifestyle.
Indeed.
So you are listening to Contesting Wrestling, the podcast where we talk about the things that fans love and other more normal, sane people who like good things don't understand about wrestling. My name is Evan Burke. I'm a writer. We started this podcast because I have been friends with with my co-hosts for a very long time, I wanted to understand wrestling. I wanted to maybe see if I could take this thing that I really don't like and try to investigate it and find something to respect within it. And I sort of did, and over the last few episodes, we've been building up a lot of goodwill, and all of that's gone now. So let's have everybody else introduce themselves, and then I'll explain why.
My name's Doc Diamondfire. I've been involved in wrestling for over a decade. I love it. I've been watching it since I was a little kid. Evan is a dear friend of mine. We definitely gave him a bunch of salt this week to be salty about. But to be fair, he did request the topic, and if the idea,
I did.
If the request was, hey, make me really like this topic, we may have given him a different list.
Oh, I knew. I sort of knew what I was getting into.
Yeah. And
So-
Professor.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson. I'm a professor of philosophy at Mercy College and a fan of pro wrestling, brother.
Brother.
So we've been doing this for a few episodes now, and I've been avoiding this topic because it was one of the only things I knew about wrestling, one of the only things almost anybody knows about wrestling. And that topic is Hulk Hogan.
I knew about him before I even knew what wrestling was, I think.
Yeah, I remember him when I was like 2 or 3, even just seeing his image in the media. And I didn't start like paying any attention to wrestling for several more years after that.
Yeah, unless you are very literally too young to remember it, like unless you were maybe born in the early 90s or something, even then you'll probably have a vague conception of who he is, just because he was such a huge pop culture figure. I saw him in movies when I was a kid, and he was inescapable. He truly was inescapable. And so I needed to learn about him. I foolishly, and I came to really regret this, I was like, well, I guess it's such a big figure, we'll have to make this our first 2-parter. And we'll have to do, let's do an 80s Hogan episode and a 90s Hogan. And to me, I was like, oh, that'll make a nice arc. That'll make a nice character arc where we see the rise and the fall. And
It's not
Well,
how that worked.
That's not how
The fall didn't happen in wrestling, actually.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
the
No.
fall happened because of the internet and the leaked. I don't even really want to talk about it. Like,
Yeah, this is. I will say
It's,
for somebody who is not normally a big fan of wrestlers, I have seen like 4 wrestler sex tapes. So
Yeah,
I
I
guess
never,
that-
I never watched it. People are like, "Oh, you must have seen the Hogan sex tape." I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't go out of my way. I've seen enough of his body over the years.
it is like the most perfect childhood ruining, like, bursting of the idyllic bubble of around a beloved figure that could ever be.
I was, however gross, because I don't know, I didn't sit down and watch it. I saw like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
clip
yeah.
that people were put when it was a thing going around. There was no way there could be anything as horrifying in that sex tape as in one of these matches. One of the promos starts with like a super zoomed in close up on like the Geiger-esque landscape of his back and just slowly pulls out in a way that I found really gross.
Yeah.
Like there was, oh man. All right, let's.
Musculature of Hulk Hogan. So we're talking about the '80s today, right?
Yeah, we're talking about the 380s matches today.
Yeah.
So if you can give
all
me,
right, the matches are the one we designated as the good match is the very famous Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant from WrestleMania 3 in 1987 at the Pontiac Silverdome in front of a reported 93,000 something fans, but I think we've come to learn that was an exaggeration.
It's a disputed number. It was a hell of a lot of people. That much is absolutely true. WrestleMania was getting bigger and bigger every year, and they wanted to fill a stadium, and they filled that stadium, whatever the final number was.
The next one I'm ambivalent about to some degree. It's between Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage from WrestleMania 5 at Trump Palace or whatever.
Trump Plaza.
Trump Plaza. And the second WrestleMania in a row at that point hosted by Trump. We can get into all of that. I am ambivalent about this match because I think from a technical perspective, it's not. I wouldn't say it's a bad match, but it angers me greatly. I find it's a very frustrating match for me as a wrestling fan. Then the actual bad match actually doesn't anger me quite as much, but it's just kind of mediocre. It's Hulk Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake against Zeus and, again, the Macho Man Randy Savage from SummerSlam 1989. And yeah, well, we'll talk about that later. So let's start with Hogan Andre.
So first, I'm going to make I'm going to start with the one positive that I really have about all of this.
Yeah.
And this is maybe a blanket statement for the entire era. But I could sit down and watch 6 hours uninterrupted of promos from this era. I have to say, like, that was... And it was bad because it really got my hopes up because I sat down to start watching it, and the first thing I watched was the promos, and I was like, oh, these are very exciting. This is a lot of fun. I know that it's a real cliche to talk about the 80s and cocaine use, but it's also... I would be remiss if I did not mention the obvious cocaine use amongst at least some of the wrestlers. And Hulk Hogan, I mean, it has to be, right? It's got to be. There's got to be something going on.
It's hilarious watching him in one of the Andre promos talking about how he's doing it for all the kids who, like, play it straight and, like, don't do any bad stuff. And you're watching him like, you are such a fucking lying hypocrite. Yeah. I don't know how much cocaine Hogan did. He seems to have been preserved, and maybe it was just because he had so much more money to spend on doctors and stuff, but he preserved himself way better than a lot of guys of his generation. I don't know.
Eventually his back fell apart, and to this day he has trouble walking and everything. He will still, like, it's been a few years since he's attempted to have a wrestling match, but the last few times he has, it was mostly just him standing there while his opponent ran into his fist, which may bring us to Andre the Giant.
Yeah, so this is my first time watching a match with either of them, with either Andre the Giant or Hulk Hogan. Obviously, both of them I was familiar with in some context outside of it. Andre the Giant was in at least one great movie. I don't think Hulk Hogan was in any good. I've seen a couple of his movies. I don't think any of them were good. I don't think he was ever in a good.
I think an argument can be made for Suburban Commando being at least decent.
It would be great if somebody...
C. Yeah, not a C+ or a C-, just a C.
I would really love to see, like, a director pull some stunt casting and put Hogan in a sort of, like, deep, respectable, dramatic role that he can play later in life as an aging, broken man.
There's that Jean-Claude Van Damme movie where he plays himself, and I think it's kind of introspective. That would be fun to see with him.
Was he in any of the Expendables? Because I think he would make a good Expendable.
Oh, I don't know. I never saw any of those.
No, I always meant to. It seems like mindless fun. Mindless.
So Hogan seems like...
They got Austin, I think.
They did get Austin.
Hogan seems like... he seems like the 1980s. He seems like...
Oh, yeah.
This is our heroes had at most 2 personality traits in the 80s. They were all, giant beefcakes. I feel like I see a lot of the bodybuilding influence in this era of wrestling that you don't see in other eras, where guys do like that shoulder popping gesture thing where they and that's supposed to look threatening or impressive. The guys are just obviously there in part because they are big and beefy and impressive looking, which means they also can't really move around. Everybody looks very stiff. Everybody looks sore. I feel like I needed to get down and like stretch on the floor just while I was watching this because nobody looks comfortable doing what they're doing. Like, that's for a man who is a legend who in theory spent a huge amount of time wrestling. Like, Hogan, sometimes he looks like he's having a hard time getting around, obviously not as bad as Andre, who I am amazed could physically move around at all.
Oh, he wrestled until the very end almost, and it was like, it was sad to watch as he got older. At this point, the thing about Andre the Giant was he was clearly still the most famous wrestler, like, long-term in the world. This match would have been the big, him passing the torch to Hogan. He hadn't been defeated in years and years and years.
Yeah, they claimed he was undefeated for 15 years for his whole career, but
That's
That was a
probably not
fabrication.
true, but the point is nobody had ever really seen Andre get beaten. But physically speaking, like he had to be convinced to do the match because he thought he was already done.
I mean, he looks like he's having a rough time. It looks
Yes.
like it was not sad per se, but
Yeah.
it just looked well, that's the other thing is like I guess this whole, as much as I loved the promos, I fucking hated the wrestling in all of this. Like, and I really, when you were children and you enjoyed this era of like what was it that drew you? Because as an adult, it's just, do you still enjoy this as an adult outside of the nostalgia
I
factor?
enjoy it more as an adult, honestly, just because I'm a much bigger student of wrestling and I can see what they're doing. I completely understand why you would hate the wrestling. A lot of it's just boring wrestling. And honestly, that was a big complaint at the time from people who were big wrestling fans. Vince McMahon put his shiny TV show with all of these ridiculous characters on TV, and then they'd have a match, and it would just be headlocks and bear hugs, and then the finishers weren't very exciting. But to a little kid, none of that really mattered. And I can't explain to you the appeal is that you're not, these days especially, you look for who's really good at wrestling, who has an appealing looking wrestling match. When you're a little kid, you just want the good guys to win. So the thing that you need to do is to make the good guys the best good guys ever. And that's what Hulk Hogan was doing with his promos, especially to the children of the 80s.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, for me, as a kid, wrestling was live action comic books. So when you're looking at the comic book, a lot of the time the characters are just punching each other, right? Like sometimes they'll use their superpowers or whatever, but a lot of it just boils down to punching. And so I guess I was kind of primed for that. And it's like, oh, what are they going to do live in a ring in front of me? They're going to punch and they're going to try to slam each other and they're going to put each other in bear hugs and stuff like that. It didn't bother me that much. For matches like this, I think it was the promos and the hype built them up in my head so much that I wasn't going to think about them as anything but great by the time I watched them.
Just the fact that it was happening, that's what was exciting.
It's more like a Godzilla fight than it is like
Sure.
two athletes fighting. It's these giant, and that's very much what Vince wanted to portray, these much larger than life physically characters. Like Andre the Giant, sure, he could barely move, but you fight him. You know,
we'll get into this more in the next episode, but
Yeah.
we also watched the two matches between Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, and those matches, especially you talk about the influence of comic books, those matches really seemed like when you watch comic book movies and people with mind powers spend a lot of time looking seriously into the camera going like with their hands out, and supposed to be, that's basically like if you got two guys to just do that at each other while they're touching.
That's totally what it is. It's the power of Hulkamania and the power of the Warrior. It's these four energy forces pushing against each other. What are they going to do? They're going to, play mercy.
And Andre
Yeah.
the Giant had the most power of anybody for so long. I would maybe I'll send you a clip or two of back when Andre could actually move. I mean, he wasn't doing moonsaults or anything, but he was a great athlete in his day, especially for his size. But that day was 5 to 15 years before this,
Yeah.
really.
This was the final victory of the WWF over the wrestling world.
The entire rest of the wrestling world, basically.
Because you've said that a lot of that the history of 70s into the 80s is Vince McMahon taking over all of the other smaller independent.
The
Not
mid-80s.
even 70s into
Not even
80s. It
70s.
happened very quickly. This lends credence to what I've said before of how Vince said he just thought that the other promoters weren't willing to work nearly as hard, because as soon as any pressure was exerted on them, most of them folded within a year or two, because they had prioritized making sure that their product was just good enough to get the people still coming, but not so good that I don't even know, not working hard enough to make it even better. But as soon as Vince came along with this to appeal to the kids on cable TV and just kept producing product, it was just over.
Let me give you some of Hogan's history because I think that'll help you understand what's going on here a little more. So Hogan was this guy from Tampa, Florida. He was born in Georgia, actually, but he grew up in Florida. He was a bass player. He played fretless bass in a bunch of bands.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Hogan
hard.
was a bass player, yeah.
That's hard. Even if you're Jeff Ament of Pearl Jam and you play out of tune all the time, it's still hard to do.
So
Fuck you, Jeff Ament. Sorry,
Oh, God.
So he became a wrestler. He was trained by Hiro Matsuda. Back in the days when like wrestling training was, you'd show up and they'd break your leg and see if you came back, and then if you did, they'd train you.
That's what happened to Hogan. Famous as the story is Hiro Matsuda put him in what's called referee's position in amateur wrestling, where you get on all fours and your opponent gets on top of you. And they said go, and he dropped his knee on the back of Hogan's ankle, breaking it. And a few months later, Hogan came back, and they were like, okay, we'll train you to wrestle.
Johnny Rods did the same thing to you, right, Doc?
No. Well, when I first went to Johnny Rods' school, the people there made me exercise until I hyperventilated, and then made me exercise more, and I just got up and kept going, and within a couple of months, I was cool with everyone. That was, I proved to them I was willing to do it.
I mean, there can be a lot of value in that. When I was
Yeah,
a child,
actually.
my father brought me out into the woods and left me there just with a pocket knife.
Yeah.
And I had to kill my way to freedom. And, do I still wake up screaming at night sometimes? Yes. Do I have a lifelong resentment from my emotionally distant father for abandoning me in the woods and forcing me to murder my way through all of those animals? Yes. But I also don't have any of those skills anymore.
Oh.
Just for the sake of Evan's parents, I just want to ensure the audience that this was not a true story.
That Evan's really good with a pocket knife.
Well, that, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but no, that I obviously learned on the streets.
Yeah. Well, you say the hard streets of the village in New York, and people scoff at you, but 20 years ago,
Yeah, people don't really.
bit of a different story.
People don't realize shit was fucked up
Yeah.
back then. It's the NYU campus now, but it used to just be
it's-
it used to just be crackheads blowing each other as far as the eye could see.
Yeah, it used to be, kids in their early 20s are screaming and puking. It's like, yeah, they're not stabbing each other. Also, I will not tolerate anybody in their 50s in the East Village who are punk rockers screaming and vomiting all night long, complaining about kids in the East Village screaming and vomiting all night long now just
Yeah.
because they want quiet.
That's fuck pretty much everybody over 40 is the point, but
Including
also,
Hulk
yeah.
Hogan.
Including
So,
Hulk
yeah.
Hogan.
so
all right,
back to...
but I guess isn't that
Keep all that in.
isn't this style of training isn't that maybe not great in the long run?
Well,
to
there was
injure,
a point to it, and this isn't going to make it any better. They didn't want people actually to get in. It was a closed business, and especially before everybody admitted what wrestling was, it was very much a con. It was a carny con man business where you fleeced the stupid marks who thought you were fighting out of their money. And it was bad. It was real bad.
But also because people believed it, you had to be that tough. Because at any time you walk into a bar, a few guys could be like, hey, you're one of those fake wrestlers, right? Let me see you fight. And you had to be able to take them or else you made the business look bad.
I do often think about the fact that if we were born just 2 generations ago, everybody would have to be all men had to be constantly prepared for physical combat at all times. It seems like people were just beating the shit out of each other all the time. Even my dad, who is actually a very gentle guy who did not leave me in the woods. But even my dad got into fights all the time in high school, and it's really hard to picture that now, knowing him.
And you probably went to war too, so you know,
Right.
you
Yeah,
had to
that's
shoot
the ultimate
people and
form
shit.
of fighting. Yeah,
Well, I mean, it other than ultimate fighting, it is.
ultimate fighting is actually penultimate fighting. It's very it's
The penultimate
not,
fighting championship.
It's not well named.
Okay, so Hogan goes to work for Vince Sr. in the early 80s.
Where he also has matches with Andre the Giant, I might add, that in the ring were significantly better.
Yeah, Hogan's a heel at that point. Andre is much more limber. Hogan slammed Andre a whole bunch of times during those matches, but that's another thing that they lied about in promoting this match.
If it didn't get across during the Hogan-Andre match, the big thing in the match, the big climax, was when Hogan finally body slams him at the end. They still replay that clip, and it's seen as one of the biggest moments in wrestling history when Hulk Hogan finally, especially after failing at the first part of the match, finally lifting up Andre the Giant and slamming him. And every time Hogan tells the story, Andre gets a little heavier, and a few more people were in the Silverdome that night.
And also apparently he wasn't able to slam him in rehearsals.
Yeah, well, okay. Not to say, oh, that wasn't was or wasn't real, but Yeah, the guy taking the body slam has to help, and Andre couldn't help much.
Oh, no, that was
Yeah.
and that was very impressive. I will say, like,
Yes,
as
yes.
much as the whole thing was boring and I hated it, like that moment, it's once again, it's hard.
Right.
There are moments in wrestling, even in the lowest points of wrestling, where it would be a challenge for anybody to not be impressed
The
by
first
it.
hour and a half of Home Alone is pretty boring, but that 20-minute scene where he's just murdering those robbers is
Oh,
still
yeah.
great to this day.
Have you ever seen that YouTube video where a doctor sits and watches Home Alone and
No.
explains all of the actual medical things that would happen to somebody? It's fucking
Oh,
great.
they'd all
Look for
die
it. Yeah.
several
Oh,
times
yeah.
over.
Oh,
In the
it's
sequel,
amazing.
when he's throwing bricks at their face from,
Oh,
the,
yeah.
from the roof, yeah.
But
No.
yeah, I don't think WWF would have been as big without that body slam.
Oh, absolutely not.
And
was
it seems like a big metaphor, right? I mean, that's
Right,
kind of
right,
what
right.
you were driving
Right,
at.
it's the American superpower slamming this, oversized, seemingly immovable, unbeatable competition.
Foreign,
The
I might
Soviet
add.
Union.
The French. Well, he was French. The French giant.
French, whatever,
Soviet,
right?
yeah. Right.
Right.
Andre Rousimov.
Yeah.
Oh.
You could argue that Bolshevism had its ideological roots in the French Revolution.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
That's another
Many
podcast.
have.
It is.
there.
That's once we are popular enough, then we will just start the more overtly socialist version of this podcast.
So back to Hogan's history. So he worked for Vince Sr. in the early 80s. Then he gets the role doing Rocky 3. Actually, he was in a great movie
Yeah, that's right. He was in Rocky 3.
Really?
as
Yeah.
Thunder Lips,
I actu-
the wrestler.
It's like
I don't
it's
think I ever saw Rocky 3.
oh, I love Rocky 3. I think it's my favorite.
yeah, I think it might be my favorite too.
I mean, Hogan's in it, and Mr. T also.
he shows up early in the movie. One of the first things that happens is Rocky is doing an exhibition boxer versus wrestler fight, and Hogan plays the wrestler. And it's a great scene, He spins Stallone around and throws him into the crowd and stuff. It's very entertaining. It's very light before what actually becomes a very heavy movie. It's Rocky 3. It's before the franchise became just our cash in every year.
The strange thing, and this is really telling about how the wrestling business changed with Vince Jr., is that Vince Sr. fired Hogan basically saying, look, you can't do both movies and wrestling. If you're going to be an actor, go to Hollywood and I'm not going to use you anymore. So Hogan left the WWF, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, as it was called at the time.
So hard to say.
And then and he did the movie, and then he came back and went to the AWA and worked for Vern Gagne in Minneapolis.
Was there a reasoning behind, I don't want to have any fucking actors in my essentially a theatrical production?
But they didn't sell it as a theatrical production.
Yeah, no,
if you're
they
an
didn't sell it.
actor, actors do fake stuff. You're a wrestler.
This
It's
would
supposed to be
akin-
real.
This would be akin to a baseball player saying, I'm just not going to play these next month and a half of worth of games to go shoot a movie. The team that they're signed to would be like, no, you're playing these games.
But surely Vince, there must have been some acknowledgement that you had to be a performer, right?
No.
Nobody expects baseball players to be performers.
Right, no, but this was the early 80s in wrestling. They were still selling it straight ahead as a sport.
So even internally, no wrestling promoter in 1978 ever pulled a guy aside after a show backstage and was like, hey, when you are being angry at the other wrestler, I need you to be angrier.
That did happen, of course. But they didn't say, I'm going to leave your... You see, they were running 5 or 6 days a week. I don't know what the WWF schedule was.
Doc is saying that it wasn't so much about the entertainer versus sports guy thing. It was more just about they needed him to work those shows.
You work for me, and if you want to go work somewhere else, you're not going to have a job when you come back. We're moving on without you.
But I think part of it was also that they thought having an actor on their roster, if people knew that was an actor, they'd start to think, they're an actor, maybe they're faking.
Okay, I get it. So it really, people really bought wrestling as real.
Some people did
for a long time.
Or it was very important to the promoters that they're at least, I don't know, that they were perceived as...
You have to play it as straight as possible, or else it's no fun. Especially when if everyone looks straight ahead and says, yes, this thing that clearly isn't real come see the show about it. It's a lot more fun if the audience just accepts that and shows up. But then if the people who are performing poke holes in it, then the whole thing falls down.
But
Cool. You did just describe the economy. All right, keep going.
Yeah.
But yeah, the promoters and wrestlers were extremely protective. I don't know if you've ever seen this video of Dr. David Schultz.
Dr. D, Dr. Death.
Dr.
yeah.
D. A reporter comes up to him and is just like, "Hey, so isn't that stuff all fake?" And he like slaps the shit out of him.
Whoa.
And that was it for him in the business.
Yeah. He fell down, sued him and everything, and Dr. D was fired. Because this was early WWF, and Vince McMahon did not want his guys to be that tough.
Yeah.
He was getting ready to tell everybody, no, look, we know you know this is just performance.
That was John Stossel.
John Stossel, yes.
Oh, okay. Now I'm on board with this. Now
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Oh, you may have also noticed, not to this may have been a reference made in the Zeus match. Hogan put somebody in a front face lock, and Gorilla Monsoon is like, "Oh, it's a painful hold," and Jesse Ventura said, "Just ask Richard Belzer." And
I had a note about that. Yeah.
All right.
What is that?
well, Hulk Hogan was on a talk show with Richard Belzer, and Richard Belzer was going on, "Oh, isn't wrestling fake?" And Hogan's like, "Oh, I'll put you in a front face lock." And he choked Richard Belzer out, and Belzer fell to the floor. They had to go to commercial, and they paid a hefty settlement there.
I was gonna say it's also. I mean,
Yeah.
that's Detective John Munch. Like he's friends with basically all cops.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you really don't want to mess with him.
Well,
also he proves that The Wire and The X-Files takes place in the same cinematic universe. Okay.
That's
so
fantastic.
that's like a lot of energy you're fucking with.
We'll
right
have
there.
to talk about this later. I haven't heard this theory.
And it's not a theory. John Munch was in both fucking shows.
Yeah, he made appearances. Well, but yeah, that was why he mentioned Richard Belzer, because Hogan had to show him, no, brother, this is all real.
Wow.
So
Just when I thought I couldn't be any angrier, he hurts American treasure Richard Belzer.
So Hogan's working for AWA. He becomes one of the top guys. He gets to the top where he fights the champion. And I've seen they have this big super card, like 15,000 people or something, clearly all dying to see Hogan win the fucking title.
Early 1983.
And they don't give it to him. They do like a DQ or something, and he doesn't win the title. Vern Gagne didn't think that Hogan would be a good top guy for whatever reason. He also didn't think it was a good idea to sell T-shirts and merchandise, which Hogan wanted to do. He just totally didn't see it. He had Hulk Hogan and let him go.
Hulk Hogan will claim that he had a lot of, as much or if not more input than Vince McMahon did in the style that eventually won over the nation. And stuff like that lends credence to that. Hogan wanted to merchandise. Hogan wanted to branch out to other forms of entertainment. And he just couldn't find a promoter that would let him, that could have his vision.
He does seem like a man who understood the culture at the time.
Yeah, and then that's a thing that I keep saying on this podcast. Wrestling is most successful when it mirrors the current culture, and Hogan did. He was a walking, breathing neon 80s sign.
It was basically like a bunch of overly buff white guys who worked hard, but also
yeah.
don't realize like the luck that got them in the place they are, doing a bunch of stuff that's not really all that impressive for the most part, and then getting paid an insane amount of money to do it.
Well, the top guys were anyway.
They are obviously doing some work. I mean, to be in that kind of shape, you got to work out a lot. Hefting Andre the Giant is obviously a fucking achievement.
The work is in the travel, brother. The Vince McMahon, especially at the beginning of that, would do tours that wouldn't make any logical sense. They'd make sense for television. You'd work New York, you'd work LA, you'd work Chicago in that order in 3 days.
Ugh.
And, some of the guys would work 7 days a week. The schedule that was called upon for the WWF in the mid-'80s, there's a reason a lot of those guys are dead.
Especially if you're partying all the time,
Right,
too.
especially if you're doing a bunch of cocaine. And steroids, by the way, are legal at this point. They had not been made illegal yet. So if you look at these guys and think, oh, they're on steroids, what a cheat. No. That's what you go to the doctor and you said, can I have some steroids, please? I would like to look as large as possible.
Plus-
How much?
If everybody's on steroids, it's not cheating.
Right, and that became one of the biggest problems, that you couldn't get into wrestling unless you were at least 6'2" and 250 pounds.
There is a point where I started to wonder, like, is Hulk Hogan tan, or is he just pumping so hard all the time that all of his blood is up against the surface of his skin?
Like
Oh,
an
he's tan,
engorged
brother.
mosquito.
Because there's a
Good
point.
one.
There's a point during one of the promos.
Suck the blood from all the other wrestlers. And
That is accurate, though. There's a point during one of the promos for the Hogan Savage match where I'm like, his need to just like look so pumped all the time looks really painful, and it kind of made me think of Slurms McKenzie in that episode of Futurama, who was the party worm who was contractually obligated to never stop partying, and at one point he was like, "You guys are gonna go party without me. I gotta go take a nap." I'm sure that this character trope has existed in other places, but I remember it from Futurama.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just seems like and it was the same thing with like the Ultimate Warrior, where there was a point where
Oh my God,
where
Warrior
was just like, oh, it really looks like he should have thought of a less energetic character, because he's just to have a character where you have to constantly be like, Hogan just has to constantly be, I'm pumping, and
Yes.
I'm like I got sore just watching him.
it's kind of all the characters at the time, too.
Almost everybody was screaming at the top of their lungs.
Jake the Snake Roberts was like one exception.
Yeah, he
would
was the
talk
only
about
one who'd talk low.
Just to finish up the timeline there, so Vince Jr. takes over the company in '84, hires Hogan, who's happy to leave the AWA. Hogan wins the title from the Iron Sheik in '84. 85 is the first WrestleMania, and then 87 is the biggest WrestleMania at that time, the WrestleMania 3 with the match with Andre. So it was just those 3 years in which Vince McMahon completely conquered the wrestling industry with Hogan.
Yeah, the territories still existed in 1987, but none of them were doing well. The main competition, the National Wrestling Alliance, was collapsing and consolidating their power in Jim Crockett Promotions in Georgia and the Carolinas, and which is what would become WCW. And it was very fast, very fast.
I want to mention, because I would be remiss if I didn't mention him, Bobby the Brain Heenan, the manager of Andre the Giant, who I think, in that promo is extremely entertaining.
Very much so.
I wanted to mention that
He's great.
the slip on Gorilla Monsoon's part, and we should really talk about the announcers a bit too.
Oh, I have
oh, yeah.
I have some notes about that.
So- I think,
but Gorilla Monsoon slips and calls him Bobby the Brain Heel at one point, which was amazing.
Yeah, we don't have to talk that much about the wrestling. There's a couple of bear hugs. Andre holds himself around the ring.
How
He
common-
cheats. He cheats quite a bit.
He cheats a bit.
He's the one to rip up the padding
Yeah.
and expose the concrete floor.
I did notice, listening to the commentators, that especially this era of wrestling, seems like one of the only places where you really hear men objectify other men in the way that they would normally objectify women, where they're just talking about like Hogan talks about having the biggest arms in the world, and the other guy, like, there's just a lot of talk about their bodies and how they look and how can anybody defeat these like amazing men, and it's
Jesse
just,
Ventura had the full tale of the tape for both competitors, with the size around of all of their major muscles, how big their hands and feet were.
yeah.
But that's
He's
a
a-
boxing
It is-
thing. It's a
oh, yeah, I
sports
guess so, yeah.
thing,
Jesse Ventura also in
So wait, but
Okay.
before you start talking about
All
that,
right.
so Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura, I think, are the greatest announced team in the history of wrestling. There's a case that could be made for maybe Monsoon and Heenan, which happened occasionally, but I mean Heenan was great at everything. I think he was best as a manager. Ventura and Gorilla, they just add. I mean, we could talk about this more maybe with the Warrior match, but even with the Andre match, as fucking slow and plotting and boring as it is, they tell a compelling story throughout the match, and which I think does a lot for it.
they do. I understand this was the time, but Jesse Ventura, over the course of several of these matches, even when there's one match where it doesn't really have anything to do with a storyline about a woman, Jesse Ventura is very concerned about gold diggers and gold
Yes.
digging,
Right.
and wants people to know that that's not cool, and also gets very excited about Hogan. Hogan threatens a woman physically at one point.
He threatened Sherry. He was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to hit Sherry. He doesn't hit Sherry. He gives Sherry the old atomic drop, and then Elizabeth hits Sherry.
And does Macho Man also do that at some point? Or I can't. Or are these?
I'm not sure about in this match.
But anyway, but Ventura's very like, oh, it's time for her to get put in her place, and it's
Right,
just
right.
obviously it's
Yeah.
revealing of of the psyche of the time. Don't get me wrong, but
certainly,
it was
certainly.
like wow, you don't hear a lot of open calls.
Ventura, of course, is the heel announcer. But was Gorilla not so refreshingly articulate for a wrestling announcer compared to everyone else you've listened to so far?
I guess I did notice them in a way that almost all the other commentary, I just block it out. I don't even really pay attention to what's happening. I'll be watching it with Laura and she'll laugh at something they say and I have to rewind it because I'm just not taking in
So much modern wrestling just has 3 people shouting at you the whole time.
Yes. I guess I did appreciate that they had characters.
Yeah.
I liked that.
Ventura was really the first heel announcer
Yeah.
of any note. So he defined that whole thing that they've just, that became kind of a caricature at some point, and they've sort of drifted away from since then.
So, and also I just want to point out that at the opening of WrestleMania 3, I was really fucking shocked that Aretha Franklin opens the show.
Oh, yeah.
Who was amazing, looks very unsure about this. And especially between her and her 3 backup singers, it appeared to be that there were more black people on the stage than in the entire 90,000 person crowd.
There are a lot of black people that live in Detroit, right?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I'm pretty sure Detroit's
Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah, I think it's I'm pretty sure it's whiter.
'Cause that's where
than,
they were, Detroit.
than Allentown.
Yeah.
I wanted to say
seriously.
something about Hogan's religiosity. All the fact that he wears the crucifix, that it was a big deal that when Andre challenges him and rips his shirt, he also rips the crucifix. Hogan is constantly making biblical references and stuff. You didn't catch any of that?
No, not at all.
When he won, he started pointing to the heavens. Gorilla would be he's thanking the man upstairs. Hogan was big on saying your prayers. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't realize he meant that literally.
Oh,
I thought it was
definitely
part of
very
So it's like this Christian American capital. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and train. That's all you need to do.
Don't take shit off gold diggers,
Right,
and
right.
make sure they know their place. It's what America's about.
So,
All right, let's move on to
Savage.
Hogan Savage, a match. If nothing else, I was blown away that these 2 men between them have over 6 hair consistencies.
Yeah.
Other than that, I once again the promos fucking great. I could watch promos from this era all day.
I can watch Randy Savage talk from morning till night.
Savage refuses to give a promo on this one.
Right,
actually.
right.
But okay, so I guess it didn't come across to you, but Randy Savage is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, according to just about anybody. He's in my top 5.
Yeah, he's
he's
a constant blur of motion.
Everything, the way he moves, just is so cool and exudes this amazing character. So I'm a huge Macho Man fan, which is why I hate this match so much.
So my impression of the match, honestly, was that.
So there's all the Elizabeth stuff to begin with, right?
Okay, yeah.
Which
There's all that.
It's this horrible misogynistic storyline. These 2 men fighting over a woman as if she's an object.
And that was the standard way to have two good guys have beef with each other, right? For at least watching Glow, they make it seem
that was a standard plot in wrestling up until 10 years ago.
Very recently. AJ Lee, I think, was the last woman subjected to that kind of thing.
Right, and she kind of put an end to it.
10 years ago, yeah.
At first when they started talking about it, I was just Hogan and Savage are in a 3-person marriage with Miss Elizabeth. That's beautiful. That's what. But then they started fighting, and I'm I feel like there's a real missed opportunity.
It was
here.
a very long-term story. We won't attempt to tell you the whole thing now. It was actually one of the better stories that the WWF ever executed over the course of several years. Is Savage's, kind of Savage's
descent into madness.
Yeah, descent into madness, and then an eventual redemption years later.
It's the story that's told basically from WrestleMania 4 to WrestleMania 7.
Yeah.
But you know what? In both of these stories, Andre and Savage, Hogan is the fucking heel, man. He's in the wrong. With Andre, he's totally in the wrong. He refuses to give his friend a title shot. That's all that's about.
I have to say, watching the 6 matches over the course of the last few days, which was exhausting. I should have paced them a lot more, but I did feel a sense of relief when we got to the end, because Hollywood Hogan as a villain, his 90s villainous alter ego made so much more sense to me.
Yeah.
Because if you watch his early promos, there is a lot of angry shouting for a good guy. There's a lot of angry shouting, blood rushing, like I start getting, my pulse goes up just watching him pump his muscles at the camera, and I'm like, this is very threatening.
You were watching him properly.
We'll have a lot more to say about that next episode, because
A lot about Hollywood Hogan and the transition and why it made sense and why it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. I will say that however ready the audience was to watch this match, they were equally unprepared for hip-hop, because I did watch the Run DMC WrestleMania rap.
Yeah.
And they did a pretty good job of a song that's not, very
Right.
good. But man, the crowd gives them a lukewarm and confused reaction.
This is April 1989. Yeah, rap on a national stage was still, at best, a novelty. You have to remember, growing up in New York, that hip-hop was just a thing.
Yeah,
right?
I guess
But
so, yeah.
hip-hop was, like, invented and developed in the Bronx and Queens and then around,
I mean, they were in New Jersey.
Well, yeah, but they
And it
were
was
at an
80
arena show in New Jersey.
And
you know?
I feel like DMC had hits from like 85 on. I could be wrong
DMC
about
had rap hits.
Yeah,
but
right,
hip hop in general didn't hit the mainstream until Hammer came out in like late 90 or
true.
something like that.
That's true.
And then it grew from there on like the really big stage. Like random, the Midwestern white people were all of a sudden like, oh yeah, rap. But they weren't really into that in the 80s. No, Run DMC certainly were. Well, I could go on about Run DMC. They're incredible.
I will say, just looking at my notes for this match, they really just devolve. Because I think I was just getting upset, and then at the end I was like, kids like this because they don't know things.
I have things to complain about.
I hate you two as children for liking this.
We weren't into it yet.
And
yeah, we
then-
weren't there yet.
I know. I just was angry that I was
This was
watching
like
it.
these matches for us were like prehistory.
Yeah.
They felt like they were eons ago.
Yeah, it was just a couple years though.
And so I think we also probably forgave the slowness of them a little bit too, because we saw them as this like old timey thing.
Sure.
Anyway, what do you have to complain about, Professor?
So this goddamn. So first of all, yeah, Hogan's the heel. I totally buy Savage's supposed paranoia that Hogan's just trying to get to him so he can get a title shot and whatever through Liz. And anyway, they have the match. Savage is awesome. He does all of his great stuff. He looks great the whole time. He beats the hell out of Hogan. He does these great double axe handles in the ring, out of the ring. He hits him with his absolutely beautiful, graceful elbow drop that puts everybody down. 1, 2. Not only does Hogan kick out, he throws Savage off of him, gets up, hulks out, acts like just brushes off everything Savage had done to him the whole match, hits him with 3 punches, a big boot, and a leg drop, and it's over. And just like the freaking greatest wrestler of all time, just completely jobbed out to, Hogan.
And I gotta say, hulking out does not look intimidating.
Guys,
It does not
please,
announce to me
hulking up.
hulking up.
Hulking up.
Sorry.
Right.
Hulking
Yes,
up.
hulking
Well,
up.
it's not clear he's going in a direction.
That's true.
First off, it's
Until
not,
he points. He's
And-
coming at you.
it looks like it just look. It's. I mean,
I said Hulk.
I first
You
saw
did.
it. I first saw it in
You said Hulk's
the
out.
match between him and The Rock.
Right, right.
From 2002, where it was like this, sort of throwback to a classic thing, and the audience hadn't seen it in a long time. And I was like, okay, maybe it looked silly then because he was older and it had been too long or something. No, it looks very silly and ridiculous, and does not announce to me that a man is about to do more violence. And I know that this might be a dumb criticism because the whole thing is supposed to be big and silly.
No, it's not a
But
dumb
like, I
criticism.
don't know. I was trying so hard. I have come at this podcast in a very positive
Your critiques are
way
valid.
where I'm
Adam.
really trying, and even to the point where people who have listened to this have been like, I wish you got a little more aggressive. I feel like you tried to, and I don't know. I didn't get it. I didn't get
In-
the
in
appeal.
many
the
wa-
purpose of this podcast is not for us to convince you wrestling is good. I personally want to hear what you think, good, bad, and ugly. I want new fans to listen to this podcast, and if they have the same questions and think, oh, that's a dumb question, no, you're going to ask it, and we're going to be like, no, that's valid.
But yeah, lots
Yeah.
of wrestling fans feel this way about Hulk Hogan.
Okay. Oh,
Hulk
that's good to
Hogan
know.
is neither of our favorite wrestlers, nor
No.
is he on our like top 50 lists.
I understand his act. He actually did have some very good matches with people who weren't good, and some very good matches with people that were good. But
he had some really good matches in Japan, actually, which
Yeah.
maybe we'll
Yeah.
get to eventually.
maybe one
But like,
day.
yeah, I feel like I understand why he was popular in the same way like I understand why Ronald Reagan was popular, kind
But-
of where
and-
it's still a big step back for humans.
And like how Reagan sort of embodies a lot of the things that are wrong with America, Hogan embodies a lot of the things that are wrong with America and a lot of things that have been wrong with pro wrestling.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Completely.
Um,
But right, the main event, as far as I'm concerned, is like what you keep saying is the good part, is like the promos. These characters are incredible. The fights themselves are almost secondary. And if you watch the TV shows, like there wasn't all that much wrestling on the TV shows. There would be some matches that were clearly treated as like secondary filler, and then a lot of promos and hype. And the shows were entertaining as hell if you just watch the promos and hype.
was that a Vince idea? Was that a Vince? Like
No.
I'm sure people were always cutting promos, but did Vince have them kind of dig into it some more?
Since it was such a heavy television product, yes. The idea was, especially on the top level, that the champion would come on television and do a promo, but would never wrestle on television, or would very rarely wrestle on television. In order to see the champion wrestle, you had to buy a ticket and come to the arena. And that's how wrestling companies used to make money. The ticket to the arena eventually got swapped into buy the pay-per-view. And eventually they monetized television so much with the advent of cable TV that champions will wrestle on television all the time now. Most of the time, anyway. So no, it wasn't just a Vince thing. It was an old thing in wrestling, even in the before times.
Two last things I want to say about this match. I thought it was cool how like they all come out with a security detail.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth comes out with Pat Patterson putting his arms around her and protecting her from her own security detail
Right.
because she needed that extra.
Is that what that was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They all trusted Pat. Pat is by now. He's quite out as a gay man, and they were all like, "Well, nobody wanted to touch Liz because she was actually with Randy Savage, and he was very paranoid." But everybody was like, "Well, Pat can touch Liz," and Liz was like, "Yes, please protect me from these thousands and thousands of people. I need to get to the stage."
Even he doesn't quite touch her. Like his
Right.
hands, there's like a
He
good
still hover heads
few
a
inches
little
between
bit.
his arms and her, and then his arms and the security.
Yeah.
The last thing is Hogan comes out last, which is usually reserved for the champion.
Right.
But of course, because he's Hogan, he has to come out last.
Hogan was still clearly the biggest star.
And Savage, more speaking to the idea that Hogan's really the heel in this story, Savage challenges him to the title match, not the other way
Yeah.
around.
So the third match,
This was officially the designated bad match.
it was the bad match. I guess I didn't enjoy it significantly less than the other matches.
I liked it more than I thought I would.
And
Yeah, me too.
honestly.
To be entirely honest, maybe look, we'll watch more Randy Savage matches so I can maybe try to see what you
Yeah,
guys
yeah,
are.
yeah.
I will say the wrestling that I actually enjoyed the most in this,
Yeah.
in all of these matches, was the 2 minutes that this guy Bobby the Barber Beefcake or
Brutus the Barber.
Brutus
Beef.
the Barber Beefcake. I actually found him to be very animated and
Yeah.
embodying a character and had a physicality that was a lot of fun. That I thought him and Zeus were like way more entertaining to watch than everybody else.
Oh, that's fair. That's a hot take there.
Also, because I am married to a librarian who knows all knowledge, because that's what you have to have. You can't get out of library school.
She went to school for a
until
long
you know
time.
things. Oh yeah. She was like, "Oh wow, like did they know how racist this was then?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And apparently there is a long and painful history of plantation owners during slavery naming their slaves after figures from Greek mythology.
That's interesting.
And
That's very
I was like,
interesting.
oh, this is.
Yeah, I
I'm
didn't
not
realize that.
surprised that there was a horrifying racist aspect to this man's
yeah,
character.
no, certainly not.
But I felt, and then he was in Friday.
He's
Yeah.
Debo in Friday. He's been in several
It wasn't he the
notable movies.
Wasn't he in The Dark Knight? Or am I thinking of another?
Yeah.
guy?
No, he's a prisoner in The Dark Knight.
Yeah, he's on
Yeah.
like one of the boats. He's
Oh!
the guy with the eyes that point. His name's Tiny Lister. He's
Totally.
made quite a career for himself in Hollywood.
Well, and I gotta say,
Yeah.
when I learned that made a lot of sense because I felt like he had a few moments in the match, like there was a point where they hit him and he's like dazed, and it was one of the best like whoa I'm dazed kind of moments of acting I'd seen in any wrestling so far.
Unfortunately, he couldn't really do much wrestling.
No, he looks uncomfortably large, like
Yes.
many wrestlers of the time.
Well, he was brought in because he'd just made the movie with Hulk Hogan called No Holds Barred, where Hulk.
No holds barred.
Yeah, now No Holds Barred is like it's not a great movie or anything, but of all of Hogan's movies, it's the most Hogan of the movies, and it's definitely a cult classic, if nothing else.
Is that
Hulk
the one
Hogan-
where somebody's throws a dog into a lake in the opening shot?
I don't think
I'll
so.
There's
I'll
a
bring
scene
I'll-
where
I'll
he
figure
pick-
that out.
There's a scene where he picks up one of the bad guys and he's like, "What's that smell?
Yes.
What's that smell?" And the guy's like, "Dookie."
Yes, I am. I have heard. I've listened to the "How Did This Get Made" episode about this
All
movie.
right.
Hulk Hogan plays, not much of a stretch. He plays a big-time professional wrestler named Rip. And Zeus plays Zeus. Zeus in SummerSlam is supposed to be the character from the movie coming out of the movie to fight Hulk Hogan, the actor that played Rip. And, I can go on about how it's stupid, but man, was this a huge success. And
Was the movie a hit?
No, but SummerSlam was.
Oh yeah.
And Brutus the Barber Beefcake was kind of Hogan B. He was Hogan's best friend, and he had much kind of the same shtick. He was just a little smaller and younger.
So apparently he kept his job in wrestling as long as he did and kept like sort of near the top because he was Hogan's best friend. When he started out in the early to mid 80s, before he became the Barber Beefcake, he was just Brutus Beefcake and he was straight Chippendale. Like that
I was
his
gonna say,
character.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
because I was like, this guy is basically like if Sweeney Todd was a Chippendale, was kind of the vibe I was getting, which is great, which is an amazing
That's pretty
character. He's an insane, murderous barber who's also a stripper. This is fucking great.
it's
You watched
totally
the promo they
accidental.
did, right?
The what?
The promo that they
Oh,
did,
yes.
right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The blades are a part of me. Like, just ridiculous. You were talking about cocaine.
Oh, that dude actually got arrested once because he was working as like in a subway as a
Like a ticket taker.
ticket taker.
Not in New York.
And there was a threat called in because they found some mysterious powder at his station that they thought was anthrax, but it was just his cocaine.
I mean, I somehow respect him even more now. It's amazing.
This was years later. He did not save his money.
A couple things about this promo. One, this is the one that opens up on the landscape of Hogan's back, already slick with oil and sweat in a way that's very gross. Then the first thing that Hulk Hogan says is, "Ever since me and the barber hooked up, we've been hanging and banging."
Yeah.
Hanging and banging is a common Hogan refrain. He's referring to working out at the gym. Sometimes he'd say clanging and banging to indicate the plates hitting each other.
But like when you do a curl, like you let your arm hang and then you bang it back up.
Right. It sounds like something else.
Oh, okay.
it's
'Cause I
also-
was like, all right, this is actually getting so like Hulk is simultaneously in a 3-person marriage with Elizabeth and the Macho Man Randy Savage, who actually turns out to have a more nuanced concept of masculinity than we would have thought given his name. And then also he's hanging and banging with the beefcake, hooking up at the gym all the time. Like, this is very progressive at the time. No, none of that was true. None of that was true.
Maybe
was-
all subtext.
So
right?
I would hope so. I would, because if it's not subtext, then these guys need to work on their accidental subtext generations.
By the way, it's in this promo where Hogan talks about Moses parting the Red Sea for some reason.
Oh, and he talks about it in the context of like the Hudson or like Lake Ontario
Yeah.
or some
Yeah.
shit. I can't remember.
I think they're at the Garden for this one, right? No, that was the next year.
That was the year before.
That was the year
I
before.
think.
during Hogan's theme song.
Oh, Real
I
American.
I
yes.
found myself
Quite a
wondering,
banger.
like, does he ever fight for people's rights like a real American? And then during his heel turn, which we'll talk about in the next episode, he actually made some very good points about how about how Ted Turner had been exploiting his labor, and that Hulk Hogan was alienated from the surplus value created by his labor. And I'm like, all right, like, I see what's going on here, but also that probably didn't go the way that I
mean,
he
did wear red and yellow.
It's a real...
You can cut that.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of hugging, still a lot of hugging in this match. More anger hugs.
It's all Zeus could really do is choke and squeeze, and I at least believe the bear hug a little more when Hogan does it to Savage. Savage is a lot smaller than him. It's like he could pick him up, and that's like okay. But even then, it's like the bear hug's a really bad move.
I did like the whole gimmick with Zeus, where the only way you could hurt him was by poking him in the eye.
Right.
But then Hogan beats him with like 3 leg drops, but still, none of those leg drops look like they did any more damage to Zeus than anything else they did to him all the match.
Not at all. But the match was full. It was full of chaos. It was like compared to some of these matches, it's like it kept moving. They kept tagging everyone in and out. Crowd was with it the whole way. Sherry
is awesome.
Yeah, Sherry's always great.
The crowd's into it. The crowd gets really towards the end when like Hulk is like choking the lady or something. Sherry. Yeah. The crowd is just very much like, yeah, Hulk, you threatened that woman. They're really for it. And Jesse Ventura is like fucking harping on it the whole time. What is the thing that Randy Savage does where he sticks his tongue out and he like points up? That seems.
I don't know if he sticks his tongue out. I mean, I guess
he does he puts his finger in the air and like twirls it around.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a name for it. It was just one of his moves. It became kind of a signature like movement for him.
Yeah.
Usually it would to signal like he's going up top. Try and throw that elbow.
So did he Hulk up every match? Did
Almost,
that happen every match
as a baby face, yeah.
Yeah,
he hulked up.
The crowd was waiting for it. It was the big, it was his greatest hit. He had to play it. That and just standing there for 5 minutes and posing.
I have to say the rest of this match has just been vacated from my memory. I'm like,
they don't do a variety of things. They tag in and out until Hogan wins. And Beefcake, I suppose.
So this is sort of indicative of, I guess, the waning days of Hulkamania. Like, he's still the champion at this point, but they're starting to get ready to switch things up. And I think they should have had Savage beat Hogan at WrestleMania 5 and gone with Savage for a while because Savage was so good. But they had other ideas, which we'll talk about as we enter the 90s and investigate Hogan's role there.
Oh, somebody even more tan than Hulk Hogan shows up.
Hogan already looks tired by this match. Like, he already looks like he's been going too hard, too long. Because I can't imagine
5 years straight on top, main eventing, wrestling every night in a different city.
On the road.
He was living the life of a rock star, if a rock star at the time. Like, if Vince Neil also spent 2 to 3 hours in the gym every single day and then still also was doing a ton of cocaine and touring around and doing all these shows and
the opening band beat him up every night
and fucking killing people with his car. Like, I cannot imagine keeping that up for a week, let alone 5 years. And
you didn't have the power of Hulkamania.
I did not.
And maybe you're not a real American.
I'm definitely not. I'm on so many lists. And that's like Hulk Hogan. At this point, I started to notice that facially, he kind of looks like Jeff Daniels.
I always thought he looked like a walrus, kind of.
They're not exclusive necessarily. Well, he looks like older Jeff Daniels in like the more serious roles, kind of, but grafted onto like a Greek god of meats.
But the thing that I think made him connect with the audience so much is, despite him being this like huge, powerful guy, when he's selling, he has these like puppy dog eyes, and he looks really sad, and you do kind of feel, or I at least feel sympathy for him.
He looks like, I can see why he thought he could act.
Right.
Because
he sells well, he looks like he's in pain.
He literally looks like a hound, like when you think of a hangdog expression,
he can do a couple of basic emotions and get those across really well, like pain, sadness, anger, and being
Orgasm.
threatening. Yeah, I get, like, he can do
Yeah.
a couple of those things pretty well, and that's pretty much what it is in the movies, at least. Like, I mean, I think the movies with him that I saw were Mr. Nanny.
Did you see Three Ninjas?
Yeah,
3?
yeah, I think I did.
Yeah.
And I remember him being, like, he can do those faces well, sort of. Because Mr. Nanny was pretty much like just it was like Home Alone crossed with Kindergarten Cop, kind of.
Yeah.
Crossed with Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah, no, that's what it was. Mrs. Doubtfire meets Home Alone. And he, so he's like getting hit
A little
with things.
Kindergarten Cop too, because it's Hogan, right?
But he's like getting hit with stuff throughout that whole movie, and it's like interesting. And I can see why he thought that he could make it work. But
You ever see Thunder in Paradise, his TV show he had for a little while
no,
on TBS?
no, was it?
I kind of liked it,
I
but I don't know. It might be horrible. It
You know
was 11.
For all that I hated this, and for all that I'm sure Hulk Hogan is a terrible person in his everyday life, there is something there. I can see why he was so popular, and I would made a joke about this up top, but I really do think like some director could stunt cast Hogan into a role that we would all be like, wow, I didn't think he had that in him, but that was actually pretty good. Like I don't know if he deserves that, but
Wow.
it could happen.
In Hollywood, you don't get what you deserve. You get what they think will make the most money. And yeah, I think you're right. The right director with the right role could probably pull it out of Hogan.
Cool. So laying that challenge down. All right. So I think we're gonna wrap this episode, and then we're gonna go to the next one. And yeah, I don't know. Follow us on Twitter @contestingw. Give us money on our Patreon. You can follow me on Twitter @Evan Burke, etc. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well under that name. And you can go to my website, evanburke.biz.
And my name is Doc Diamondfire. Follow me on Twitter Dr. Diamondfire. That's at Dr. Diamondfire. I am available for bookings for ring announcing, commentary, and indeed wrestling if you so desire. Please give me a follow, at me, and book me.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson. You can follow me at ScribeBen on Instagram and Twitter. You can find my faculty page at mercy.edu, and you can find some of my writing on my academia.edu page.
Alrighty, stay tuned for Hulk Hogan Part 2.
Brother!